This is the seventh lesson on wars the United States has started or manipulated the American public into joining. Like I said many times now, the average American believes America is a peace-loving nation, right? But we've been very militaristic, very aggressive militarily. And I've covered 6 wars, so this is the 7th war. We covered Iraq Invasion War, Vietnam War, Pearl Harbor, all the conflict we created in the Middle East, World War One, and we did just finished the Sioux War of 1876. Now we're going to go to the Civil War, and the Civil War isn't really a war that the U.S. started, per se. I mean, part of the U.S. did, but they broke away, so they're not really part of the U.S. That was the southern states seceding, all right? So this doesn't really apply, but I want to include it because I want to clear up a lot of misconceptions about the war, and I want to do this video again because I've improved it since the last time I did it. I can't find my cursor. Where's my cursor? There it is. I'll just use this. All right, so we're going to go to the Civil War. All right. When I teach this in my sociology course, I teach it in the section on education because this is a thing that was typically taught in schools. Many people were taught that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves, all right, which is a gross misconception. And this fits into the overall scheme of sociology. Key, I want to say, concept that we developed in the first lesson, that's central to all of sociology, is social forces. Okay, and like we said before, social forces are anything that can affect your perceptions. Right? They influence your perceptions, your beliefs, and opinions, which is your cognitive reality. All right, your perceptions is the only reality you know because that's where knowing is, in your head. Right? And the things that can influence you, we said, like things like government, media, news, false news, entertainment industry, is very effective, very powerful. Commerce, marketing, social media, which has a huge impact, right? In passing what is called social reality, what everyone is saying, what everyone believes, it's passed in a mass wave. It has mass momentum. No facts are required. No intelligence is required. People believe it, largely based upon the weight of everyone saying it. So it's reinforced. And the key is it's socially reinforced, which is powerful, right? I call it smartphone reality, which I also call idiot reality, because it's not based on anything and it's wrong almost all the time. Culture is another factor. Social force, education, click friends, all this stuff, other stuff, God, religion. But we're going to talk about education today. Education is a social force, which influences perceptions, beliefs, which controls your cognitive reality, and based upon what you believe is real, you take actions or inactions. So if you can influence and control this, you can control actions, right, which is the key, and that gives power. Now, one of the things taught in education is U.S. history, right? Every American student has to take some U.S. history throughout their academic, careers, beginning probably in grade school, and then junior high. You have to take American history, U.S. government, right? Then again in high school. One of the, according to the functionalist view, in terms of manifest versus latent function, all right? The manifest function of history is to teach us what happens, right? But a latent function of teaching U.S. history is to create allegiance to the country, belief in our goodness as a nation, and to make us feel good, to exploit our inherent hedonistic nature. Probably most people want to deny it or at least not admit to it, but we all are fundamentally hedonistic. We all have a desire to please ourselves. I mean, that's a core of what drives us. right? We don't want to make ourselves feel bad and miserable, right? Unless you feel good by making yourself feel miserable in some twisted way. But the hedonism is the idea that we all seek to feel good, to get pleasure, and to avoid pain and unpleasantness and suffering, right? And that's a big factor in influencing perceptions, right? What makes us feel good, and people believe what they want to believe. Thereby, the public is easier to manipulate if you can make us feel good about the country, right? Manipulate, that is, it is easier for people to get to accept and support the policies and actions of the government, despite their real purposes and harmful effects, and despite issues of morality, right or wrong, even good and evil, right? You're just going to believe, we're always doing good, right? So, we're taught that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves. That's what I was taught. I'm not sure what they teach today. It's probably a little bit more, I don't know. Recently, what's his face? Who's that guy? Ken Burns did a series on the Civil War, and he's all up on how the Civil War was fought to free the slaves. Of course, I don't care for Ken Burns' history. It's how do I want to say? It's some lightweight sophomore stuff. All right, and now this freeing the slaves is a noble cause, a good cause, and thus you feel good about your country. But what were the real causes of the Civil War? All right, so we're going to examine that today. All right. The core of what I want to look at is in this chart, and from there we have a lot of supporting elements, which I'll jump back and forth towards. All right. All this material here, and then we get to a discussion of what are the common arguments to say that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves, and we'll show how basically how empty and often ridiculous and comical these arguments are. Okay, so starting here, number one. We'll go number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Five is over here. Then 6, 7, and within 7 we'll cover this and this. All right. So the underlying driving force behind the Civil War that really led toward it was the Industrial Revolution, which occurred about 1800, maybe England. Before 1800, the first stage of the Industrial Revolution was in textiles and machines. Well, see, Industrial Revolution means machine production, which greatly increased the production quantity of finished goods and even quality. Right? You take out some human error. Right? And the first stage was textiles. That was the first product that was made through machines. The first machines were developed in England. I don't know, different weaving machines and so forth, spinning machines. Right? And those were developed like 1730s, 40s beginning, right? And on and on. And then the key machine that was developed was actually the cotton gin. That really unleashed the textile industry, because the choke point, the limiting factor, was the difficulty and time costliness of taking the seeds out of cotton. Now with the cotton gin, you had a machine that did it, so you greatly increased the rapidity of providing cotton for the textile mills, right? Which unleashed really the cotton textile industry, and it also made the slave plantation, slave cotton plantation, very profitable. All right, so that was a big increase, boost to slavery in the United States in the South. All right, and now the key with the Industrial Revolution is you're making finished goods. And there's far greater wealth generated from making finished goods than from producing primary products or raw materials. right? And this is called value added. So when you make, let's say, cotton, raw cotton, into a finished dress or shirt, whatever, you get much more wealth from the value added into converting that from cotton into a finished product, right? All right, so I want to show you an example of a cake. All right, real simple example. Let's see here, okay. All right, so here's Industrial Revolution, like we said, and here is a primary product. This is wheat grains, right? This is flour, ground wheat, right? And this is a cake. Now, the grain itself sells for 30 cents a pound, right? The flour sells for about 50 cents a pound. So it's a little bit of increase in value, all right, per amount. But a cake, this is a typical cake you can see on the internet, right? It goes, a birthday cake here goes for about $50, plus or minus $10 I've seen, all right? So you make much more value when you make a finished product. You get much more. Another example is here's a car. It's a Bugatti. I think it's a Chiron, right? $3 million for this car. It's got over 1,000 horsepower. It's like I believe it's something like 1,100 or 1,200 horsepower, which is crazy because that's a horsepower of fighter planes during World War II at the start of the war. All right, so $3 million for this, all right, and for the same weight as this car, I estimated about, I don't know, 2 tons or something like that. You get $118 of iron ore, all right. So the idea is you get for the same amount of weight, $118 for this, and $3 million for this, all right. So that's value added. The greater bulk of your profit and wealth comes from value added, right? All right, now why that's important is the North wanted to get value added. All right, the South was content because it was dominated by a few plantation owners, and they made great wealth off of cotton. So they're content with producing a primary product, a raw material, whereas the North wanted to get the greater benefit from value added. So they wanted to industrialize in the North. And I think I'll show that here. All right, so basically the North wanted value added and not to be an exploited colony. Right, and here's kind of the colonial relationship. I guess I should put this over here. All right, so here's Great Britain. It's the parent country, the home country. Here's the colony prior to our independence, or even during before the Civil War. All right, so raw materials are sent to England. All right, we're selling these, and we're not making much money off this. Cotton, wood, sugar, tobacco, different raw materials, and they're going to England, providing the materials for their society, for their industries, all right, and they're producing finished goods, clothes, tools, guns, iron goods, whatever, anything manufactured, and you make far more money selling this stuff, all right, and this is something that was recognized by the British early on. For hundreds of years, they practiced mercantilist policies from at least about 1650 and on, and within mercantilism was the idea that you have to promote and focus upon export of manufactured goods because you get far more wealth from the value added from exporting manufactured goods. And in fact, England for a long time outlawed export of raw materials and food, right? Which of course hurt the producers of that, whatever it was they're producing, whether it was wool, raw wool, or food. All right. However, what it did was it lowered the price as an input commodity for their industries. So it benefited their industries, their manufacturing, from which you get far more wealth. right? So they understood it, right? Then you have to focus on value added, and that's an old, like I said, mercantilist policy. All right. Now, in the United States, it was the North that dominated U.S. manufacturing, with 10 times as many factory workers in the North, and 90% of all skilled workers were in the North, while the South was stuck in a colonial economic dependency, all right, which led to undevelopment. We didn't develop industrially, economically, and this led to impoverishment. The South was dirt poor, except for a small, tiny handful of super rich slave plantation owners who were as rich as kings and barons and princes in Europe. I mean, they were filthy rich. But everyone else was poor. The average white person was little better than a slave. Okay, so where are we at here? Okay. All right, moving on to here, international economics at the time. So one driving factor was the Industrial Revolution. Another driving factor was economic competition in the international market, especially with Great Britain, right? So Great Britain was the first country to industrialize, right? And they had the benefit of that. And they didn't want any competition, so they tried to drive anyone else who tried to industrialize out of business by underpricing them, or other ways, in military ways too. You know, cutting off commerce, cutting off shipping. All right, but a key way was through simply underpricing. Now, Great Britain had the advantage of being the first to industrialize. To maintain that industrial domination, Britain, one strategy was to underprice their competition, driving them out of business. All right, this is the same thing that, you know, J.D. Rockefeller did to create his oil empire with Standard Oil. Right, he drove people out of business by underpricing them. He would aggressively attack one market after another, right? Selectively choosing a market, underpricing them in that market, driving everyone out. And then once he drove out, you know, he was able to control price. They move on to another market, right? Britain was doing the same thing, and they had the advantage. So let's take a look at some of those advantages. Well, one of the advantages, Great Britain had a vast colonial empire, all right, around the world. You know, the old saying that the sun never sets on the British Empire. Well, that was true. They had colonies around the world from which they can get cheap sources of raw materials, you know, lowering their input costs, giving their industries an advantage, right? They had a monopoly in those counties. They had a monopoly on the distribution, on the markets, all right? So they can control price there, and they can be the exclusive, you know, sellers, all right, keeping everyone else out. They had a great merchant fleet, the largest in the world. They had the largest naval force in the world to protect it. They controlled the shipping lanes, all right, and they also had numerous trade treaties, which gave them an advantage. And oftentimes they used the military power to enforce those treaties, to create those treaties. All right, they also controlled strategic choke points around the world. Okay, and like I said, they also practiced differential pricing. Right, so the idea behind differential pricing is the same thing that Rockefeller did, right? Where if you have a monopoly power in a market, you can jack up price in that market, right? And you make excess profits. With those excess profits, you can use those profits to subsidize underpricing below your cost within another market, right? But in so doing, you drive any competition out of business. So let's say you have market A, you control that as a monopoly. Well, you jack up price, right? So that you make a very large profit margin. Now, with the excess profits, you want to attack and aggressively take over market B, which there is a bunch of competition, say one other firm or multiple other firms, right? And you want to drive them out of business. So you take all that extra profits that you make in market A, use that to subsidize underpricing, below your cost in market B, and you drive everyone else out of business who doesn't have that advantage. Then once you got that market cornered, you have that, right, and you move on to another market. Okay. Well, that's what Britain was doing. They're connecting differential pricing, aggressive underpricing of American the market to drive American producers out. All right. Okay. Where we're at here? Okay. All right. So that's one factor. Now that leads to the tariff issue. Tariffs would support the northern industry but kill the southern cotton trade. I'm not going to read this yet. I'll try to explain it, and I'll go back and read this as a summary. I'll explain it with a diagram here. So here's the idea. Britain had the advantage. They had economies of scale. They had more developed industries. They had more developed energy systems. Whatever. It started off as water and wind, but then it led to coal and steam powered eventually, right? But whatever it is, they had more developed engineering for utilization of non-human, non-animal energies. All right, and they can make stuff cheaper. They had all the advantages here, better distribution markets, whatever. Better sources of supply. So let's say without a tariff, Great Britain could produce this product and sell it in America for $1. Make it wherever, make it in England, and then ship it to America, and then sell it for $1. Now, American companies, the new infant industries just starting up, right? Maybe they don't have as refined a supply source. They don't have the market volume, so they can produce a product of similar quality, but sell it for $1.15. Now, that's a case. Who's going to buy the U.S. good, right? They're going to buy the British because people are going to pursue their self-interest, right? And if there's a product just as good for less, they'll buy that, right? So what's going to happen is the U.S. company is going to go out of business, right? They can't afford to stay in. They're not going to have any sales. So now the U.S. manufacturing industry, they ask the government for some assistance in the form of an input tariff, right? Let's say the government passes a 30% tariff. Now, with a 30% tariff, that British product, which they sold for $1, now at best they can sell for $1.30 because you're tacking on an extra 30 cents, an extra 30%, right? The American product you sell for $1.15. If this is the case, then everyone's going to buy American, right? No one's going to buy this. Who wants to pay more for the same quality, right? So this is good for U.S. industries, right? Good for U.S. manufacturers, which were where? In the North, right? But this was bad for the South. Now, how was this bad for the South? Well, it had to do with currency and the balance of trade, all right? Or credits, currency or credits, it's the same thing. So here's England again, here's the United States, and by the 19th century, cotton became big. It became a big export. Cotton was king, big export in the South. All right. Now these are British pound notes. So England is a manufacturer of cotton textiles. All right. They don't grow any cotton, so they have to purchase the cotton. All right, to feed their industries, to make money. So what they do is they take their money, their British pound notes, and they send them to the U.S., where they're exchanged for whatever currency is being used in the South. Now, it depends upon the era, right? The Wildcat banking era was 1830s to 1861, 62, all right? But whatever currency is being used, they exchange it for that, or credits, all right? And British pound notes come over, so more and more, right? And in exchange, cotton goes back to England and so forth, right? Now, the thing about it is, with these British pound notes, if British goods are outpriced or are overpriced, right, no one is buying British goods, so no currency is being recycled back to England. So what happens is the more cotton the British wants to buy, well, their currency or their credits build up here in the United States, right? And pretty soon, and especially given the fact that British goods are outpriced, this currency is becoming worthless, right? The supply of this currency is going way up, right? The need for it, the demand for it is down because British goods are outpriced, right? So with the fall of the value of their currency, right? Essentially, the Southerners are getting paid less, so they're going to demand a higher price, right? Per bale of cotton, and if they do, Britain's going to go to an alternative source, which they did. They went to Egypt, and they also went to India. India was a great source of cotton early on, all right? Okay, and another thing is as the British pound notes keep flooding to the U.S. and not being recycled, well, Britain's going to suffer through a currency scarcity, which could drive up interest rates, which can then hurt their economy. All right. Okay. Let's see. Did I cover that well enough? Let's see. So here's a summary. British send pound notes to the USA. They buy cotton. U.S. enacts tariff. Right. British goods are now too expensive. No one buys British goods. Pound notes do not recirculate. They're not recycled back to England. Right. The supply of pound notes in the U.S. goes up. The value of the pound notes falls. Supply is greater than demand. Southern cotton growers then need to raise price British goods to stay in business. Britain switches to India or Egyptian cotton. The southern cotton sales plummet, right? Southern revenues plummet, and the supply of cotton, there's a glut of cotton because it's not being sold to England. It builds up here. What does that do? The price of cotton in the U.S. falls, and who does that benefit? That benefits the northern textile industries because they're still buying the U.S. cotton, right? So the Southerners are getting screwed doubly. They're losing sales to England, right? Plus also, while at the same time northern industries benefit, and then from the tariffs, and then because the South can't sell cotton in England, there's a glut of cotton in the United States, causing prices to fall, and that's good for the northern industries again. So they doubly benefit, and the South gets doubly screwed. All right. So the South's not going to like that. All right. But it's good for northern textile manufacturers. Also, currency shortage. All right, I tell you about that already. Okay. So now let's talk briefly about the need for these tariffs in the North to develop the industries. Like we said, it's through industrial manufacturing where you make most of your money. All right, far more than primary product production, like raw materials and food. All right. Now, Alexander Hamilton was a key guy early on who recognized the need for tariffs, and he based it upon that became the basis of his infant industries theorem, I guess you call it, right? His infant industries argument, stating that U.S. industries are nascent or infant, right? And they can't compete with Great Britain's, so they need protection from the advantaged British firms, all right? And some of the advantages they had were economies of scale. They're larger, more efficient, more developed steam engine and coal industries. They had better supply chains, right? And also better distribution markets. They had a vast colonial system, right, where they can dump their goods. And also had many trade treaties. For example, they dominated Latin American trade, far greater than the United States in volume. It was England who dominated Latin America for a long time. All right. Now, also, in addition to Hamilton, there was a German economist named Friedrich List who said pretty much the same stuff. He said in his book, National System of Political Economy, that Great Britain, with their industrial and commercial advantages, used free trade to maintain trading nations as colonial dependents. All right. For example, the South. The U.S. Gained its political independence as a colony from Great Britain in our Revolutionary War, but the South, and really our whole economy as a whole, did not gain its economic independence until the Civil War, right? Until the South was broken away from being a colonial dependent on Great Britain. And so that colonial relationship, the dependency of the South on Great Britain, benefited a few really rich plantation owners, but it hurt the overall economy. And while at the same time it was providing British industries with cheap raw materials, right? Which was then competing, suppressing American industrial development, while serving as markets to purchase British manufactured goods. So the South is supporting Great Britain, right? Selling them cheap raw materials and then buying British manufactured goods, right? They're supporting the British economy. This then would hinder industrial development of the trading nation, right? In this case, the U.S. South, and thus pauperize those countries. In this manner, slavery/cotton kept the South as a backward, impoverished, third world economy, all right, a colonial dependency, an economic minion of Britain, right, subservient to Britain. It impoverished the southern masses, but it made a few slave plantation owners literally rich as kings. I mean, that is true. They're as rich as kings and barons and princes in Europe, all right? But there's only a handful of them. They benefited, and they had the political power, all right? So they kept the South locked in that, all right? And the basis of that was that slave labor. All right, here's the tariff. So here's the basic tariff history. You'll see here is the tariff that was enacted with the Civil War, that caused the Civil War, right? The Morrill Tariff jacked it up. We'll take a look at this history in greater detail in a second here. What did I want to say about this? I don't know. Let me move on to the next thing here. Okay, that's that. So I'll just review here. The Northern Industrial Interest wanted value added, wealth generation, because that made much more money. To overcome the British advantage, they wanted tariffs to protect their infant industries, which would raise the price of British goods, making them unsellable. This would destroy the balance of trade for the South, resulting in a glut of pound notes in the U.S., depreciating their value, increasing the price of U.S. cotton, which would decrease sales. British would go elsewhere for the cotton. For example, they'd go to Egypt or India. The southern economy would suffer, causing a cotton glut, reducing price, which would benefit the northern textile industries, right? So they didn't like that. All right, so I want to take a look at the tariff history and show how it was the key battle line between the North versus the South. All right. Okay, so this became the key source of contention between the northern free states and the southern slave states. All right. Now, the first tariff was enacted with the Constitution. The Constitution was ratified in 1789, right? And it provided for a 15% across the board, even tariff on all imported goods. All right. And then the next tariff, non-constitutional tariff, was a tariff of 1816, and it was basically largely a tariff for economic warfare against Great Britain. Now, the War of 1812 had ended, I believe, in 1815, about the middle of 1815, so it was over by this tariff. But what happened was, let's see, I have some stuff here on this. Okay, yeah. Well, wait a minute. Well, the reason why, okay. All right, so you have the tariff of 1816, and it passed because both the North and the South supported it, all right? And the reason why the South, it was the northern manufacturing interest that really supported it, right? But the South went along, and largely because we just finished the War of 1812 against Britain, right? And Britain was playing some dirty stuff. They were competing with us for territory, in Florida, in Louisiana, also, the northern boundary, especially in the frontier, right? Where exactly the northern boundary is going to be at. I mean, we tried to grab Canada in the War of 1812, but things were still unsettled. And also another reason why Southern supported it was because Great Britain was conducting aggressive dumping of U.S. goods, the differential pricing. So they're trying to drive U.S. U.S. Companies out of business in the southern, supported, he gave some patriotic support against Great Britain for that. I say here border conflicts in Louisiana, Florida, and in the north, the northern border. It wasn't until the Oregon Treaty where they settled the 49th parallel as the border, all right? And then also there was another argument was a budget deficit. So I forget who the Secretary of Treasury was, but he said, listen, there's going to be a big deficit. We need this as a source of revenue. So the South went along. But the thing about it was that shortly it became apparent that this was killing the Southern cotton industry and Southern economy. And so it ended support in 1819. By 1819, there was a panic and recession of 1819, and the South experienced a significant fall in cotton exports and cotton prices, just like I said up here, right? So that's starting to play out. All right, so that was the last time the South supported tariffs. From there on, it was a constant battle. All right, the battle was between the Southern cotton plantation economy, the agrarian, primary product, backward economy, and the burgeoning Northern industrial economy, plus also the Western. This political union between the northern interest, northern industrial interest, the urban interest, and the Western expansion interest, right? They were mutually supporting, as you will see, with the Civil War, economics. I'm not going to show you yet. How there was a symbiotic relationship here where they benefit each other. So this political union started pretty early in the 19th century. Political interests hold a majority, and they pass a high tariff. The tariff battles begin. So this was a high tariff, and then in 1828, the Northern and Western political majority, they hold a majority in Congress. They pass an even higher tariff, which the Southerners call the Tariff of Abominations. So let me see if I got a picture of the. So. This is like the 1824 tariff. Here's 1816. Here's 1824. Here's 1828. Bam. All right. It's way up there. This is the highest tariff we have in our history. And like I said, it was called the Tariff of Abominations. It's like, it's almost like a biblical curse, to these Southerners. All right. But as you can see, the Southerners kept winning a decrease in tariff all along until the Civil War. All right. Then bam. The Northern and Western interests won a majority. They won the House, the Senate, and also the presidency. All right. And this was a key trigger for the Civil War, as we'll see. All right. So by 1819, the support for tariffs ends. The tariff of 1824 is jacked up. The South doesn't like that, but the Northern and Western interests dominate politics. 1828, they're still dominating. They passed a really high tariff, the Tariff of Abominations. And then the Northerners still, the Whigs, at that time was the Whig Party, and before the Republicans came in, they passed a reduced tariff, even though, they're in power, to mollify Southern outcry. Right, and they promised that within 10 years, that'll be reduced to even further to 20%. All right. Now, South Carolina, however, was not, satisfied. They weren't appeased by this, and they threatened to secede, and they took action to defend the port of Charleston from federal closure. The very same threat that initiated the Civil War. Remember, the Civil War started with attack upon Fort Sumter. All right, so let's take a look at that, what that was all about. All right, so here's the Fort Sumter, which is in the very middle of the mouth of Charleston Harbor. Here's Charleston Harbor. Fort Sumter's right there. So this is guarding it. This is blocking that mouth. Federal troops here during the Civil prior to the Civil War could not be allowed because they could shut down that harbor. All right, and the idea is this: if you want, if here's here's South Carolina. All right, now if South Carolina threatens to secede, and essentially what they're doing, they're saying we're not going to pay this federal tax. Right? You can't allow a state to not pay federal tax. Otherwise, everyone else is going to not pay. Right? And then your whole country, your whole nation crumbles because it has no revenue. If they don't pay, then why should anyone else pay? All right? So you got to make them pay. Otherwise, you're setting up your country to be destroyed. Without revenues, you can't govern. So now, essentially, South Carolina is seceding from the Union if they do that. But you can't allow that, right? So do you have to invade all of South Carolina? Do you have to invade every cotton plantation, every tobacco farm? No, right? All you have to do is block the key port. Where's Charleston Harbor? I think it's right around there, right? All you got to do is block the one port. If all that goods, if South Carolina's economy is heavily dependent upon export of both cotton and export of tobacco, all right, and a big buyer of that is Great Britain. Well, all you got to do is shut down the port, then you shut down the whole darn economy, all right, and you kill them as a state, all right. So what did the South do? I mean, what did South Carolina do? They said we're not paying this, right? And they took action to defend the port of Charleston, right? Again, this is the exact same thing that caused the Civil War. Lincoln moved to resupply and keep Fort Sumter, going, and just after the resupply ship showed up. I believe it just showed up. Anyways, then they attacked Fort Sumter, right, and that kicked off the Civil War. All right, and then 1842 rolls around. The Whigs still dominate Congress, all right. The long-awaited 10 years roll around, and the promised 20% tariff is put into effect. This only lasted for like a month or so. It was barely in. Then the Northern-dominated Congress passed a new tariff, jacking it up to 40%. So they promised all along, since here, we promise you 20%. As soon as this goes in, shortly thereafter, they jack it up to 40%. Well, this pissed off the Southerners, right? Then by 1845, the Southern Democrats had control of both the House and the Senate, and they passed a reduced tariff, 25% from 40%. And then in 1857, the Democrats still controlled the House and Senate. They passed an even lower tariff to 17%. Right? But in May of 1860, the Morrill tariff passes the House, and however, it's blocked by the Democratic-controlled Senate. Senator Hunter was the chairman of the Finance Committee in the Senate, and according to the rules of the Finance Committee, the chairman has the right to decide when a bill is ready to go to the whole floor for a vote. Right? Senator Hunter was just sitting on this. He wasn't going to let this bill leave committee. All right. So this bill was dying in committee. He was letting it die in committee. But what happened was 1860, a November election rolled around, and Republicans won a clean sweep. They won the House, they won the Senate, they won the President. Now, there's no stopping any bill that they want to put through. All right. Unless there's a political fracture within the Republican Party. But something like this, it's going to get full approval of the House, Senate, and no veto by the President. So it's going through. So the idea here is the key battle line between North and South was over money. It was over tariffs, because tariffs determined economic fortunes, right? Whether the industrial manufacturing North prospered or the agrarian, primary product, cotton producing, whatever, tobacco producing South prospered, right? And cotton was king of all those. So whenever the Democrats took power, they lowered tariffs. Whenever the Republicans took power, they raised tariffs. When the Republicans won a clean sweep in the 1860 election, southern states started seceding, claiming that the North would free the slaves. But was that true? Was there any basis to that? We're going to take a look at this right now. It goes over here. So let me see what I got over here. Let's take a look at the tariff. So this is the tariff 1816. Here's the tariff 1824, 1828. And this is 32, where they reduced it to try to appease them, but it wasn't enough. And South Carolina says, you know what, screw it, we're still leaving. We're not going to pay this tax, right? And that almost caused a war then, a civil war then. So the Civil War almost played out here. Same situation, Fort Sumter, right? They moved to protect the port of Charleston from closure, right? And then you had multiple tariff reductions by the Democrats. 1845. Here's 57. 57 is as low as it gets, right? Then 3 years later, the Republicans sweep the election, and they know the tariff is going up, and it did. It jacked up again with the moral tariff. All right. Okay. So let's take a look of like I said, it was after the election, after the Southern Democrats got a clean sweep defeat, right? Then they started seceding, and then they started saying, the Northerners going to free the slaves, Northerners going to free the slaves. But was there any truth to that? Was there any move to free the slaves? All right. First thing you have to know, there was no bill before Congress, right? Without a bill, slavery is a law. In fact, slavery is in the Constitution. That's where it is law. Our fundamental law of the nation is the Constitution. And slavery is written 4 places into the Constitution. In the 3/5 rule, in the 1807 no slave importation after that, in the Fugitive Slave Clause, and also the no amendment to the slave clauses in the Constitution at the end, in the section on amendment. I think it was Article 5. So there was no bill before Congress, right? Now, people are going to say, well, there's abolitionists. The abolitionist was a tiny movement, right? And very small movement. It had only one significant paper, but its distribution was only several thousand, right? And those abolitionists were largely based out of Christians in the Northeast, all right? And they didn't want war. They wanted, some legislation to free the slaves, whatever. They weren't looking for war, all right? Now, there was one radical guy named John Brown, but John Brown was a very extreme, radical, rare case, all right? And what was his significance? His significance is blown way out of proportion. So here's John Brown, right? And his main incident was Harper's Ferry, the Harper's Ferry attack, right? Which he attacked and seized weapons from an armory, right? Now, he's a single guy, craze fanatic with 18 men. He led 18 men in this attack. He had about 36 men total aligned with him, right? So about half went with him. And he went on a 36-hour rampage, right? That's it. What's that, a day and a half, right? And then he's captured. He's captured by who? By Northerners, right? He's tried and he's hung for 5 deaths. Now, 5 deaths, that's not like a big movement, right? This didn't inspire, this extremist abolitionist thing pretty much died with that. Now, John Brown was a product of the attempt to force slavery into Kansas, and only after the pro-slave border ruffians rampaged through the town of Lawrence, Kansas, that Brown demanded the spilling of blood for blood, right? So what does that mean? What inspired Brown was not freeing the slaves in the South. What inspired him was a fight to prevent slavery introduced into Kansas, all right? Okay. Now, there was no political will or power, even if there was such a bill in Congress. And there wasn't a bill, right? In 1865, with the Civil War already going on, the northern states, by themselves, no southern states, passed the 13th Amendment by only 2 votes. It barely passed. With only northern states, they barely freed the slaves. Which means what? They barely wanted to free the slaves themselves. Now, before the war, with southern states voting, there was no chance. And there was no way that northerners would even introduce such a bill when it would instigate a civil war, which the northerners were desperately trying to prevent. They didn't want a war, so why would they introduce such a bill, right? And even after the Civil War is going on, right? So by 1865, the Civil War is no longer a factor because it's already being fought, right? Even then, they barely passed it by only 2 votes. All right, and it also another factor is this had to be a 2/3 vote, right? Plus a 3/4 of the state ratification. So after the vote passes successfully, then you have to have at least 3 out of 4 states ratify it, right? Now, let's see. There were 15 slave states, right? There were 34 states altogether, 15 of which were slave. And out of the 34, that means to get 3/5, to not get 3/5, that means 9. You had to, let's see, wait a minute here. Yeah, 3/5, 9. Oh, wait a minute here. Let me try to think this through. So 34 states. Oh wait. What? 34 times 0.25. Okay, so 9. So in order for this, in order for an amendment to the Constitution to not succeed, 9 states have to not ratify it, right? Well, there's 15, right? So, it's easy to get at least 9 states to not ratify it from the South. There's 15 Southern. What I'm saying is there's 15 slave states. Only 9 have to agree to ratify it, to not ratify it, right? For it to fail, right? Well, all 15 are not going to ratify it. Anyways, I'm saying that it was impossible. There was no way that this bill was going to pass, right? So there's no political threat. The Northern Republicans bent over backwards. So here's another thing. Now, after the November election, and then after the Southern states started to secede, claiming that the North is trying to free the slaves, well, the Northern-controlled Congress, because the Southern states left, right, moved to undercut that false, excuse of seceding, and they passed the 13th Amendment, the Corwin Amendment, which stated which guaranteed the right for them to keep their slaves. So if you pass an amendment to the Constitution which guarantees the right of states to keep their slaves, well, that undercuts the Southern argument or reason for seceding, right? And the reason why the North did that is because they want to prevent a war. Now, according to Goodwin, a historian, let's see here. this is, remember I said that it passed by only 2 votes? And according to Goodwin, Lincoln was trying to buy votes. He was buying votes here. Let's see what he said. Okay, so this is Lincoln. Remember that I am president of the United States, clothed with immense power, and I expect you to procure those votes. To buy those votes. This is what Lincoln says. He expects you to buy those votes, procure those votes. It was clear to his emissaries that his power extended to plum assignments, pardons, campaign contributions, and government jobs for relatives. So this is the payoff here. Lincoln is using these things, right? Jobs, pardons, campaign contributions, government jobs for relatives and friends, right? To buy votes. That's according to Goodwin, who is kind of a respected Lincoln historian. All right. Brooklyn Democrat Moses F. Odell agreed to change his vote. Right. When the session ended, lame duck. He was given the lucrative post of Navy agent in New York. So here's a case where what happened was Odell lost the election in 1860, right? He's out of a job come inauguration day or whenever the House changes over. I think it's probably around the same day as inauguration, which back then was in late March, I believe, right? So come late March, he's out of a job, right? So as a lame duck, right? This is January vote. He's already voted out of office. He's not gonna come back to Congress, all right? He's got to look for something else. Lincoln offers him a lucrative post as Navy agent, right? This is a moneymaker in New York. All right, so that's an example that Goodwin cites of Lincoln buying votes to get and for what? To win by 2 votes. He had to buy votes, and he only won by 2, which means the North didn't want to free the slaves, right? So the idea that, the North's trying to free the slaves, well, it's all false. All right, the Northern Republicans bent over backwards to avoid war by passing the Corwin Amendment. That was on March 2nd, guaranteeing the states' rights to have their slaves, protecting slavery. And they also offered New Mexico. This is actually before. In December of 1860, the House proposed that New Mexico be admitted as a slave state. All right. So let's take a look at the Corwin Amendment first. So here's background behind the Corwin Amendment. According to Goodwin, Lincoln's behind this also. Doris Goodwin indicates that Abraham Lincoln was the originator of the Corwin Amendment. While as president-elect before he was inaugurated, so he's elected, right? And in December he's not inaugurated yet, but he's the president-elect, right? Lincoln instructed Senator Seward, who was the Secretary of State, to introduce, still a senator, introduce an amendment that resolved, quote, the Constitution should never be altered so as to authorize Congress to abolish or interfere with slavery in the states, right? So that's essentially what the Corwin Amendment was. It protected the right of states to maintain slavery. The federal government will have no say over, the labor relations in terms of slavery. Lincoln also proposed a bill that would repeal all states' personal liberty laws that contravened the fugitive slave law. All right, both the Constitution and the 1850 Act. Right. So the Constitution, I said the third place it's written into the Constitution is the Fugitive Slave Clause, which states that, hey, if a slave escapes from a slave state from his owner, then gets out, escapes the slave state, goes to the North, well, it's an obligation of the Northern, police authorities to arrest that slave and then, send him back to the South, right? And however, there were personal liberty laws which contravened that, but Lincoln proposed a bill that would repeal all these laws, right? Make them null and void. You've got to return them. So he's saying that, hey, listen, right? We're not going to change slavery, and if there's any slave that comes up to the north, we'll return him. We guarantee it. That's the law, right? We'll send him back. And the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850 to bolster the Constitution, right? Lincoln emphasized both of these in his 1861 inaugural speech. Right? Now here's another quote from Lincoln from Goodwin Cites. Quote, this is Lincoln's words. My paramount objective in the struggle is to save the Union. It is either to save or destroy. It is not either to save or destroy slavery. Not. Right? So his main thing was he's going to save the Union. Right? And he said that in his inaugural speech also. He said this in his first inaugural address. He said, I'm just going to, paraphrase him. He spoke very eloquently and very, I guess, legalistically, technically, right? So I'll put it in more common language. He said, everywhere, all these southern states are seceding, saying that the North is trying to free the slaves, and he says, well, no one's trying to free the slaves. In fact, Congress passed an amendment to the Constitution guaranteeing your right to keep your slaves. So what are you talking about? And then he says, also, we'll fully support the Fugitive Slave Act and Fugitive Slave Clause in the Constitution, because that is a law. If any slaves come up here, right, to escape, well, we'll arrest them and send them back down there. We'll defend your slavery, right? All right. And then he says, but if there's any free black man in the North, you can't, kidnap him, take him to the South, and make him a slave, right? Which was a practice that was being done, right? That's against the law, he said. And then he says his key things were this: you will pay federal taxes. That was key. That's a tariff. And along with that goes in supporting that is you will respect all federal properties. And what's he talking about? He's talking about forts, right? So if the South takes over federal forts, they gain military independence from the North. They gain military independence. They gain economic independence, political independence, economic independence. And that solidifies their breakaway. You cannot take these forts, like Fort Sumter, right? And then, about 2/3 through the speech, he gets to this crux. He says, hey, listen, there are 15 presidents before me. I'm number 16, right? I'll be damned if I'm the first president this country breaks up under. The union's going to be dissolved under me. That's not happening. So that's what he said. My paramount objective, you see how much more eloquent he is? My paramount objective in this struggle is to save the Union and is not either to save or destroy slavery. What I do about slavery and the color race, I do because it helps to save the Union. Right? So his number one goal is to save the Union. And this is from the inaugural address. I hold that in contemplation of universal law and of the Constitution of the Union of these states is perpetual. Perpetual is implied, if not expressed in the fundamental law of all national governments. It is safe to assert that no government proper ever had a provision in its organic law for its own termination. So this is again saying that, I support perpetual union. You cannot break this union. All right, so then we said they passed the Corwin Amendment, and then they proposed that, hey, take New Mexico as a slave state, right? But this is what Daniel Webster said in his speech 10 years prior, over 10 years prior to this, March 1850, on the unsuitability of New Mexico territory. So this is after we took this territory from Mexico. 1848 was the end of the Mexican-American War. So by 1850 we had this territory, and there was debate upon the whole compromise of 1850, right, which led to the establishment of popular sovereignty, whether or not there would be slavery within the territories conquered from taken from Mexico, except California. California had said will be a free state because they wanted it, right? But the remaining territory taken from Mexico, and that's Southwest. Let's see if I got a map of that. Okay, so here's the territory taken from Mexico. It came across here, went through, Nevada, Utah, a little bit into Montana, about half of Colorado, cut down here, and then about 2/3 of Texas. So all this territory was Mexico's, and it said that California will be a free state, but all this territory, except for Texas went slave, right? This territory would be determined by popular sovereignty. So it established that principle, right? I think it was actually Stephen Douglas who introduced that principle here in 1850 as kind of like a, what do you call it, convenient thing. But anyways, that is the will of the people. There'll be a popular referendum, a public referendum where everyone gets to vote, and that will decide whether or not there'll be slavery or free state. All right. So what he's saying about New Mexico, Daniel Webster, is this. What is there in New Mexico that could, by any possibility, induce anybody to go there with slaves? Right? There is such narrow strips of tillable land on the borders of the rivers. Right? There's not enough water there. It's a desert. Right? There's only some little bit on the edge of rivers. But the rivers themselves dry up before midsummer is gone. Right? So the rivers are gone. Right? All that the people can do in that region is raise some little article, some little wheat for their tortillas, and that by irrigation. And who expects to see 100 black men cultivating tobacco, corn, cotton, rice, or anything else on the lands in New Mexico made fertile only by irrigation? So he's saying, this land is totally unsuitable for slavery, right? Slave plantation systems. And it's no wonder that the Southerners rejected this. Like, New Mexico, you offered us New Mexico. We don't want New Mexico. It's worthless for us, right? Maybe there's some mining there, but certainly not their system of production. So in either case, offering the Corwin Amendment, guaranteeing the right to keep slaves, and offering New Mexico to expand slavery, well, that's not trying to free the slaves. That's not trying to abolish the slaves. That's guaranteeing, that's promoting slavery. So the North is promoting slavery, not trying to get rid of it, right? And then after the war starts, a resolution was passed called the Crittenden-Johnson Resolution, right? Which basically said, right here, it was passed in July of 1861. The war started in April. It vowed that the war will not free the slaves, right? And this was vowed after the war begun. And the reason why it was vowed is because these states, these border states, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware were all slave states that stayed in the Union. All right. Yeah. So, it was to get their backing, right? Saying, hey, we're not going to free the slaves, right? Don't worry, stay with us. All right, now another thing is this. After the war started, freeing the slaves was really hot on their ticket, right? They would have rushed to pass that. Well, they didn't pass it. They didn't do anything on it until the last minute. January 31st, 1865, 11th hour before the end of the war. That's when they finally passed the 13th Amendment. The second 13th Amendment. First Corwin Amendment, the war started before it was ratified by a state. So it was like, passe. It didn't matter. Now, what the Northerners did, they didn't rush to free the slaves. They rushed to implement the Republican economic program. Right? And it's evidence what, they're really all about. One was the moral tariff, right? I told you about that, why that's important. Then there was the Legal Tender Act, you get national currency. Then Homestead Act, free land. Then the Pacific Railway Act, all rushing to get this done for providing funding and land grants for 3 transcontinental railroads. Then the moral land grant for colleges, land grant colleges, for increasing productivity of the new territories, the new Western expanded territories, and also transportation infrastructure, and then National Banking Act, right? All economic agenda. Now, next thing I want to turn to is the political reality, the writing on the wall, the demise of the Democratic Party power, all right? So, one factor that led to the shift in political power was the influx of European immigrants. Right? There was a big slug of immigrants coming in between 1840 and 1860. For 20 years prior to the Civil War, there was a bunch flooding in, and 9 out of 10 went to the north. And this shifted the demographics, right? So that by 1860, there were twice as many northern population, right, than the south, including slaves, right? And slaves were only worth 3/5 of a person representation, right? So that gave the House, they gave greater representation to the North in the House of Representatives, right? And the prognosis of the future was only going to get worse. More and more immigrants are going to come in. They're all going to flood to the North because that's where jobs are. That's where land opportunity is, right? Then the North will dominate the House. So let's take a look at that. So here is a graph of the number of immigrants coming in, and you see between 1840 and 1860, there's a big slug there that came in. All right, after the Civil War here kind of killed it, but afterwards there was another slug that came in until that's the Depression of 1873 here, where there's lack of opportunity. Now, factors for the surge in immigrants between this 20-year period, well, Britain relaxed its travel restrictions, its immigration restrictions. You also had the Irish potato famine, right? 1845 to 9. You had a pandemic of European revolutions. In like 1848, there's revolutions, and they're trying to escape that. You also had bad economic conditions in Europe. There was also the California gold rush in 49, which drew a lot of people. Advent of steamships, right, which decreased the cost of ocean transportation, making it feasible. For example, the Cunard companies were putting out the first transatlantic steamships in about 1840. And within these steamships, they had multiple classes: first class, second class, third class, and fourth class, right? Like really, really cut rate stuff where you just packed in, some compartment somewhere. All right. So those are factors for this influx of immigrants, 17, 18. All right. Now, as far as the Senate, so that influenced it. 9 out of 10 of these guys went to the North. That increased political power in the House of Representatives, which is based upon demographics. It's based upon population. All right. Now, the Senate is not based on population; it's based upon statehood. All right. However, the balance in the Senate was also shifting because, like I said, since the Constitution was ratified, there was an unwritten rule that for every state that went slave, a state would go free to maintain the political parity in the Senate. Of course, 2 senators per state, and that was kept true all along here. There's 15 until about 1848. Then, after that, the next 4 states to be admitted, California, Minnesota, Oregon, Kansas, right up to the Civil War, all went free. Which means what? It means that the North had 8 free states, had 8 more senators. So that shifted the political balance. And that was only going to get worse. I'll explain this in a second. So Nevada, once the Civil War was underway, Nevada was admitted as a state, another free state. So that's 10 extra senators, all right, for the free North states. All right. Now let's look at the situation here. All right, as far as the territories, all these were territories, right? Kansas still a territory. I think Texas may have been admitted already. Yeah, yeah. But this is a territory, so all this is territories, right? Oregon was admitted as a free state in '59, right? But all this area here, right? Dark blue is free, dark pink is slave. Now he says this according to the person who made this map that this uh, the pink here probably would go slave, but I disagree because, for example, this part of the Utah territories, Nevada, they went free, not slave, right? Why? Well, no doubt because of mining interests, right? Nevada was, they had silver there, right? Right around was it Virginia City, um, and so they had the mines, and people wanted to have access to the land, access to mines, right? They didn't want the southern um, uh, super wealthy plantation owners gobbling up all the land, right? Uh, so they wanted to go free. Uh, Anyways, all this territory will be free. New, you know, uh, this guy says that this probably would have gone slave. Well, no, right? For example, this is from Sanford Wexler. By 1861, except for Texas, the states of the Trans-Mississippi out here. Here's the Mississippi. All these out here, right, were little concerned with slavery and the cotton economy. Nevertheless, almost every western state or territory had been forced to align itself with either the North or the South, right? And these territories were unsuitable for a slave system, right? Uh, the Utah territory, well, Nevada went free, and I think Utah was undecided, right? But these are desert territories. These are very few population. All they have is 2 senators. They have very few congressmen. All right. Okay. All right. So in 1861, only New Mexico and Oklahoma stood a chance of going slave, right? And New Mexico was desert. So here's the desert territory, right? Unsuitable for slave plantation farming and sparsely populated, right? You don't have many people populating deserts, right? So you're going to have weak demographics. You're going to have weak congressional representation in the House, right? Nevada went free in 1864. The Northern Territory was also sparsely populated, but had a far better chance of increased population, right? After you remove the Indians and you expand railroads into the territory, right, making that land productive, right, which didn't occur until after 1880. 1876 was the Sioux War, right? Cleared out the Sioux, and then they allowed for expansion of the Northern Pacific into that territory, and so a lot of this territory was developed. But they had far better population potential here than in the desert. All right. C, D, yeah, what did the E? All right, so 10 years before, so this is John C. Calhoun, who's predicting the coming political imbalance, right? He predicted it in a speech in 1850, 10 years before the Civil War. So I'm saying the writing was on the wall. He says this. He says a whole bunch of stuff here. I'll just jump ahead. Before the end of the decade, 10 years, that's 1860, 20 northern states to 12 southern, right? So he's predicting the political imbalance. And 40 northern senators to 24 southerners. This great increase of senators added to the great increased number of the House of Representatives, because that's where the population is going, and the Electoral College, right? Electoral College is based upon the demographics, House of Representatives, right? On the part of the northern demographic imbalance, which must take place under the next decade, ending 1860, will effectually and irretrievably destroy the equilibrium which exists between the government commenced. All right. So yeah, he's saying, writing is on the wall. You're going to have political imbalance, and then what's going to happen? The southern political the Southerners will lose all political power, right? They'll be done for. And so this was recognized 10 years prior to this, 1850. Yeah, does that make sense? The Southerners knew that their only chance was to check out of the Union. All right. So yeah, let's go back to here. The last 4 states to be admitted to the Union all went free, providing 8 more senators. Right. The North's going to dominate the Senate. They're going to dominate both the House because of the demographics. The South succeeded in forcing slavery into the North, but ran into the stone wall of popular sovereignty. The principle established in 1850, right, conceived by Stephen Douglas, all right, and so in the North they didn't want slaves, right? Let's take a look at the history of the effort to force slavery into the North. The first little bit of drama was 1820 Missouri Compromise, which stated that there would be no slavery in the new Louisiana Purchase territory north of the southern Missouri border, except Missouri would be a slave state. So Missouri's a slave state, but all the rest of the Louisiana Purchase territory will be free north of the southern border of Missouri, except for Missouri. And then the 1850 Compromise comes around to deal with the new territory taken away from Mexico. It says California will be free, and the rest of the Mexico secession territory, they stole it. They killed a bunch of Mexicans, took the land, right? The rest of the Mexican territory will be based on popular sovereignty. Also in the 1850 Compromise, you had the Fugitive Slave Act, which helped to bolster the constitutional Fugitive Slave Clause, right? Trying to make sure that any slaves who escaped are brought back down to the South, all right? So then in 1854, you had the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which effectively nullified the Missouri Compromise and introduced the principle of popular slavery north of the 36.5 latitude line, which is the southern border of Missouri, all right? So it's saying that, yeah, you can have slaves in the North, right, negating the Missouri Compromise. However, it's going to be based upon the principle of popular sovereignty, right? But the thing about it is, I'll just jump to it now, the Northerners didn't want slavery. Not that they're in favor of black people. They didn't, the large part, they didn't care, except for the abolitionists, right? Even abolitionists were more about, a lot of them were about their own self-interest, their own, opportunity. And as far as opportunity, the slavery was a threat to the people in the North, especially, for example, Irish immigrants who were sort of the bottom of the white, rung there. And slavery represented a threat of stealing jobs, driving down wages. Now, why would it drive down wages? Because wages would be competing with zero. Slaves, you don't pay slaves, right? So that would drive down wages. It also steal land opportunity because it was, if you had to buy land, right? And the Northern Republican Party, their agenda on land was free land. Everyone gets free land, 160 acres free, if you develop that land within 5 years, right? And if land was to be sold and not free, then the people who had the greatest chance to gobble up all that land would be the richest people, and the richest people in the country were the southern plantation owners. Like I said, they were rich as kings back then. They had concentrated wealth. Stealing disposable income needed to drive the manufacturing industry. So this is the interest of the industrial elites, the bankers, and factory owners, right? Their interest was in, maintaining some disposable income to purchase their manufactured goods, right? And this is one of the reasons why the Southern slave economy was moribund, right? Because you did have sufficient purchasing power to support the manufacturing industry. Okay, So then the next thing that happened was in 1857 you had the Dred Scott case, which removed any legal prohibition to slavery in the North. So it's totally legal to have slaves in the North. Still, it did not circumvent the principle of popular sovereignty. You're not going to get around the will of the people, all right? Either through local protest or state government, right? You can outlaw this stuff in municipal government, right? And the majority in the new territories didn't want slavery because it threatened jobs, lower wages, it threatened land opportunity, right? There was great hope in getting a piece of land for yourself. Basis of the split in the Democratic Party. So this became the split in the Democratic Party, right? The issue of popular sovereignty was the basis. So the Northern Democrats knew that in order to get elected, they could not ramrod force the slavery issue. Like, we're going to have slavery, right? Otherwise, the Northerners who didn't want slavery would not vote for them. So they had to settle upon the principle of popular sovereignty. All right, we're kind of pro-slaves, but we'll leave it up to you, right? That was their chance of getting elected. Otherwise, they'd be run out of office, right? Now, the Southern Democrats were determined to have slavery no matter what. They were uncompromising, right, on the issue of slavery. We're going to jam slavery into the North, right? Right? But you couldn't do that. You couldn't do it politically. You couldn't do that through military. I mean, what are the few slave plantation owners going to wage a war against all the people in the North? I mean, that's not going to happen. Okay, okay, so the Southern Democrats who demanded absolute slavery. All right, so that was the basis of that split. We'll talk about that down here. So except for possibly Oklahoma and New Mexico, the overwhelming new territories wanted to become free states, free land, free labor, higher wages. Right? Now the Democratic Party split on the eve of the 1860 election. You had the Northern Democrats led by Douglas, right? And the Southern Democrats led by Breckinridge. That split occurred in April of 1860. Then the Unionist split. There was a further split amongst, these were pretty much the border states who were slave but were determined to stay within the Union. Their interest was in the Union. Their economic ties were to the North, right? And they were led by Bell. So there were three Democratic candidates which split their vote, which killed their possibility of any chance of election, which killed their political power. All right? Moral tariff already passed the Republican-controlled House in the spring of 1860. With the 1860 election and a clean sweep by Republicans taking the House, Senate, and President, there was no stopping passage of the moral tariff, which would kill the Southern cotton plantation economy. The Southern states immediately seceded after this election, crying, "The North is trying to free the slaves." Now, was there any truth to this? We'll take a look at this here. But I'll say at the very end here, after the Southern states seceded, the Northern-controlled Congress rushed to pass its economic agenda, which was Western expansion. We'll cover this, what their agenda was. It was all these laws which promoted Western expansion. Okay, evidence that the Southern elites used racism to manipulate the poor Southern whites, who were the vast majority of whites down there. So the vast majority of white people down there were poor Southerners, little better off than slaves. I mean, sometimes worse off than slaves. Now, after Bacon's rebellion, elite whites used race to eliminate a threat to themselves through divide and conquer. All right. So what happened was you had Bacon's rebellion. This was 100 years before our Declaration of Independence. So in 1676, you had Bacon's rebellion, and there was multiple motivations in that. But the motivations of the majority of people who rebelled, the masses, were that they were slaves. There was white slaves, there was English slaves, there was Irish slaves, and there were black slaves, right? They all joined forces, right, against their owners. Now, the plantation elites, right? So in the aftermath of that, the political and economic elites strove to prevent a future rebellion by divide and conquer, splitting the slaves, right? And what they did is they offered freedom to the whites, right? They also used racism, um, trying to align the poor whites with the elite whites against the blacks, all right? And so they fueled and fostered racism against blacks. Plantation owners strove to convince poor whites to overlook how they were exploited by the slave economy, how it impoverished them, right? While the poor whites earned little money, they were given a psychological wage. So that's how they did that, right? They're treated with deference because they're white, even though they're dirt poor. Admitted to public functions because they're white, right? Even though they were, poor and low class. Allowed to vote, made to feel superior in their whiteness, right? To keep poor whites from forming coalitions with enslaved blacks, the white elites had to teach whites the value of whiteness, right? Thus, white elites fueled white superiority as a means of divide and conquer, to separate poor whites from the blacks, from joining in coalitions. There was no political move to abolish slavery, with the Civil War. There was manufactured by the Southern elites a scare tactic to manipulate the poor Southern whites to fight for them. The rich plantation owners knew the political reality that they had no future within the Union politically, which means they had no future legislatively, which means they had no future economically. The only way they could maintain the system that brought them great wealth was to secede. Now, to secede meant war, because the North is not going to just let you leave and break up the Union. And they were too few to fight, let's say roughly 1% of the population or less, right? Therefore, they needed the Southern masses to fight for them. They needed all the poor white boys to get all riled up and to fight for them. So just as they had used racism in the past to manipulate the masses, they used it again as a scare tactic to mobilize the poor whites to fight. Racism was emphasized for divide and conquer after Bacon's Rebellion. Racism was emphasized to keep the poor whites content in exploitation and poverty. Racism was emphasized in the Civil War to get the poor whites to fight for the white elites. All right. I read a quote by the governor of Georgia, and I can't remember all the details, but he was saying stuff like this. He's saying, "Hey, listen, the Northerners are trying to free the slaves, right? Which they weren't." Right? And then he said, this is what's going to happen. They're going to take your jobs. They're going to take your homes. They're going to marry your children. They're going to be allowed to vote, right? They're going to get political power. He's making this doomsday scenario to scare the whites into supporting cessation from the Union, right? So it's a scare tactic. All right. Let's see. Yeah, so after the Southern states seceded, with Congress populated only by Northerners who controlled Congress, they then passed legislation to promote their economic agenda, not to free the slaves. Okay, so this is what happened in the presidential election of 1860. All right, like I said, the Southern Democratic Party split into three. You had the Northern Democrats, led by Douglas, Southern Democrats, led by Breckinridge as a candidate, and then Bell was in the Unionist Party. All right, you can see that this is border states: Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee. All right, and if you look at the election results, as far as the Electoral College votes, right, by being split in three, they stood no chance of defeating Lincoln. So Lincoln had 180 electoral votes. All right, and Douglas had only 12, right? The closest was Breckinridge with 72, and then Bell had 39. Right, so Douglas was Northerners. Northerners pretty much rejected Douglas. All right. So the Republican Party was dominant in the North. All right. Let's see here. So what I want to go next is talk about how the Civil War unleashed rapid Western expansion economics. Right. This is more about what the Civil War was about for the Northerners. It wasn't about freeing the slaves. So before the Civil War, Western expansion was blocked by North-South competition. Right? Remember we said that it was a fight over political power, and the unwritten rule since the ratification of the Constitution in 1789 was that for every state that went free, we'd had to have a state to go slave to maintain parity within the Senate. All right, and this is a quote here. But the North-South argument over extending slavery into Western territories stalemated both sides, so it blocked Western expansion, as it did almost other major legislation. So it blocked the Republican agenda for legislation, which I'll show you down here. Right, the Southerners blocked it. With the Civil War, Western expansion was set free. And then that resulted in economic growth, the Gilded Age, the greatest period of economic growth in U.S. history, although an age of some pretty crooked, corrupt people and brutalization of the Indians. The Northern industrial interests wanted Western expansion to support industrial production and growth in the same manner that European colonial expansion supported their industrial growth. So it went hand in hand, right? And the Western expansion economics was little different from European colonial industrial economics, right? So the home country could be considered the industrialized East Coast. The colony, in a sense, would be the expanding West, right? Providing raw materials and so a basic, simplified overview of what was happening is, as you expanded west, you're expanding production on the land. You're also expanding railroads, all right. And as you expand production on the land, which is made possible by railroads shipping the goods back to the East Coast, all right. You have the raw materials, building materials, food, right, to support the urban industrial societies, right, the cities, all right. And in exchange for the materials being supplied, money goes back to here, but that money is not stagnant. That money is not like stuffed away. That money is used to purchase goods needed for expansion, for building towns, or for supporting whatever business, or just for luxury. Okay, so you buy goods, and these goods then the purchase of goods then supports the manufacturing East Coast industries. So manufactured goods go back here. Right? So it's a cyclical flow of currency, a cyclical flow of goods. Raw materials this way, manufactured goods this way, but money circling back and forth. Now, the gross domestic product equals the money supply versus the velocity of money, which is the size of the economy. So as this money is circulated faster, back and forth, the economy grows. All right? So it's not just money going back and forth, it's money and goods, of course. All right. Now, European colonial expansion was a little different. You had military. So as you expanded railroads, you had to have railroad support towns. So urban development expanded as you go west, right? But at the same time, you have to conquer and kill off the Indians, right? That requires military operations. Right? Very similar to European colonial expansion, required military operations to conquer, pacify, and control the natives. Right? Then you build railroads into their territory. That was a big part of the colonial expansion, right? Because you have to access their goods, the markets, and raw materials. You have to transport that to ships. Then you ship those goods back and forth, and you use the colonies as a source of demand for your consumer goods, just like over here, right? So as you expand west, they become productive, they have incomes, and they use it to purchase the goods being manufactured over here, right? Now, like I said, European colonial expansion was a little different, in form, and they expanded everywhere. They expanded into India, Asia, into the Pacific Islands here, Australia, into Africa, South America, Central America, and Mexico, and Canada was English colony for a long time. It was first French, and then English for a So I want to explain the Republican economic agenda that they implemented once the Civil War started, once the southern states seceded. Well, that eliminated all Southern opposition to the Northern Republican economic agenda, and they rushed to pass everything, within a year or two. Most of it within a year after the Civil War started. Okay, so key elements of it were land grant colleges, free land, wage labor, high tariffs, promotion, focusing on promoting industry and manufacturing to get that value added. Pacific Railway Act to get the transcontinental railroads, national bank, and national currency. Right. So to explain it, we'll start here. Free land. Right. Now the Republican, following off the Free Soil Party, right, which rolled into the Republican Party later in the 1850s. They wanted to give land away free to people, right? Any settler, so that they produce on the land, right? Make the land productive, which would be a benefit to the economy, providing raw materials, input materials for industries, and they offered 160 acres free land if you show that you've improved on the land within 5 years, scot-free. Right? Now that would increase opportunity. That increased opportunity would be a source of human incentive, human drive, human motivation, human energy, which is an effective utilization of your human resources, right? Because it's only people who produce things, right? Ultimately, at the end, you can have now machines and they can have robots, whatever, right? But people got to build those things too, right? All right. And then the free land would help with the problem of overpopulation, of the immigrant flood. You have urban overcrowding, unemployment. They're forming gangs. There's trouble. There's crime. There's poverty. There's prostitution. Whatever, all sorts of stuff. Right. All the problems you're dealing with. It would help be like a pressure relief valve. Allow people to get out of the cities and go have opportunity on some land of their own. All right. It would also undermine the power of the Southern plantation barons, those few super rich plantation owners, rich as kings, right, who had the money, the financial resources to gobble up all the land in the North if they could, right? So it would undermine them by giving that land away free, right? All the money in the world doesn't matter if that land's given away free. Okay, and then it will help consolidate the control of land taken away from Indians. So you take the land away from Indians by starving them out or by killing them through military operations and kicking them off the land. But if you don't consolidate that land, if you don't occupy the land, well, the Indians are just going to return, right? And you'd have to have, perpetual military operations. So once you kick the Indians off, if you have the population to occupy the land and cultivate it for farming, well, that kills off the grazing land. Which kills off grazing animals like deer or buffalo, whatever, which is the primary food source for these Indians. So you kill off their food source, then they got to move somewhere else or starve. Also, by giving away free land, you increase prospectors looking for gold, silver, which increases the money supply. Also, minerals used for whatever, for copper or for iron, right? Okay, let's see here. Where are we at here? 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now with the land, with increasing human productivity, you have increased land development, increased development of land to produce things. So you're increasing resource extraction off that land, which is increasing productivity, which boosts the economy. Right? When you produce things, you're producing, of course, to sell things, right? That's accelerating the velocity of money there. And for land development, to promote this, the government gave away land in these grants in conjunction with railroad expansion. So to encourage railroad expansion and to actually make it financially feasible, right? The Congress gave away huge tracts of land, and one example I have here is a map of the Northern Pacific Railroad, right? It ran through here. Here's border of Dakotas and Montana, and it shows the grant in Montana, right? The railroad headed southwest here, then across, right? But you can see on either side of the tracks, right, the north and the south, all right, through a 50-mile wide track, there was huge land grants. I mean, this is a huge area. This is, almost half of Montana, and Montana is a huge state. This is easily several New Jerseys, right? So you give away this land, right? Right. Now, of course, if you give away the land, you got to take it from the Indians. This is all Indian land. This is all promised Indian land. To take it away from the Indians, you have to wage a war, right? If you don't take this land, then that railroad is not economically viable. All right. So you have to wage a war. All right. So that required Indian removal. That required war. And then, of course, if you occupy the land, then you consolidate control of that land. All right. So from this land development, you provide the raw materials, the building materials, the food, and income needed to support manufacturing and industrial society. So income is also needed. People have to make money in order to be able to buy manufactured goods to support manufacturing industries. All right, so all this raw material, food, so forth, right, minerals and cattle, whatever, they have to be transported, right? And so you have to develop these railroad systems, and there's land grants that go with this, railroad construction. So this promoted railroad construction and the manufacture of, to transport goods and people to support commerce. And the Pacific Railway Act actually authorized 3 transcontinental railroads and provided the financing and land grants for that. And then this, in turn, would support industry and jobs, right? Because as you build the railroads, those are jobs and incomes they earn, right? Which then helps fuel the economy, but also the materials for the railroad, the tracks, the timber, right? That's all part of that. And going from the steel rails to the foundries to iron ore mining to coal mining, right? And so on and so forth down the line. And it's going to increase consumption, demand for manufactured goods, which then fuels industry, right? Also making steam trains, the steam engines, the locomotives, the train cars, passenger or freight cars, right? All increasing industry manufacturing, and then you're getting the value added, right? And then also at the same time, U.S. pretty much had infant industries, even through the Civil War. We didn't have much of iron industry at all, even through the Civil War. We're dependent upon purchase of iron from England largely, right? So to protect our industries so that they can get going, we needed high tariffs. That was another part of the agenda here, all right? Now, as these railroads went across the country, they were steam engines, which didn't recycle the steam. They just dumped it into the air. So the key range limitation of steam trains was due to water. They needed to replenish water every 20 miles or so. So they established a chain of towns. As you build a railroad across, you have all these towns. All those towns, to develop them, is a source of demand, right? And then once a town exists, that's a source of demand, right? It's going to consume things from the east. You can have whatever restaurants need things from the east, chinaware, silverware, carpets and whatever, light fixtures, lamps and everything, windows and hardware to build a place, and then whiskey and wines and so it's a source of demand. It's a source of consumption. Then you also had it's a source of distribution of goods. For example, you had the dry goods store, and in the dry goods store, you may have a limited amount of products within the store itself. I mean, you're going to have firearms, tools, and grain, some basic food, staples and so forth, right? But you could buy anything you wanted. Once the Montgomery Ward's catalog came into being, right, mail order. You can get anything you wanted through the trains, right? I think it was mostly cash on delivery, COD, but you can get anything you wanted. So from fine china to porcelain dishes to chandelier to whatever, fine silk dress for a rich farmer's wife or whatever. Um, anyways, all the iron goods that are needed, even the iron used by blacksmiths, to, let's say, shoe a horse, whatever, right? The iron stock comes from the east. Um, so each town represented that. Now that town also served as the point to load goods for freight, also to unload goods, right? Unload passengers. Okay, and okay, it increased urban development, demand for urban development, and it was itself an outlet market, right? Which increased consumption, demand for manufactured goods, which then fueled industry, manufacturing, East Coast, right? So it's all, you see, it's like mutually supporting, as you can see, and all of this then leads to economic growth, which is the ultimate goal here. If that's your goal, okay, HIJKLM. Oh yeah. So another agenda was wage labor. They didn't want slavery because slavery was impoverishing. Slavery was inhibiting economic growth because no one has wages to purchase things, right? Wages are required to increase human incentive, increase motivation, right? So this drives motivation that you get pay for what work you put in. Also, it provides then disposable income for consumption. That's D1, demand for final consumption. You purchase goods, and then again, this drives your industries, right? People have the money to buy stuff, which is important, right? So that you support manufacturing. Okay, and all right. Then you have a national currency. National currency facilitates transactions. If there's not national currency, if there's not a trusted currency, that inhibits transactions. If you inhibit transactions, that inhibits the velocity of money, which inhibits your economy. All right. So all this increases the volume of transactions, which are needed to increase economic growth. Right. There was an era, wildcat banking, which there wasn't a uniform, universal national currency. Every bank issued its own notes, which means every bank issued its own currency, right? And so there's all sorts of problems with exchange, relative values, values that vary depending upon the solvency of the bank or distance from the bank, and it created a lot of unpredictability, a lot of risk, which then discouraged transactions, right? So this creates stability. This decreases risk, all right? Both and promoted both internal, inter-country transaction and external, like overseas exports and trade, overseas trade transactions, both of which helped our economy. So decreased risk in transactions, which then facilitated not just purchases and sales, but also investments, right? And increased investments affected all these areas and promoted all these things. Right, and that's increase in D2, which is demand for increase in production capacity or investments. All right, so that increased transaction volume. And then you had a national bank. The national bank was there to increase the availability of credit, to expand the money supply, right, which then is to help control interest rates. However, there is some legislation in the late 19th century, beginning, for example, in 1873 with the Coinage Act, and 1875, right, which they linked the greenback to gold, all right, and basically we went on the gold standard, and that led to a period of deflation, which has restricted hard to get money, and that increased interest rates and also caused prices to fall, and that had some negative problems for our economy. So yeah, expand the money supply. As your economy grows, your money supply should grow pretty much consistent, although the Fed today wants to maintain about 2% inflation rate, which means money supply is growing in excess of our economic growth, or it also varies with demand for money, which can fluctuate with numerous factors I don't want to get into. Decrease interest rates, avoid deflation, and deflation is falling prices, which leads to business failures, all right, which is not good for the economy. All right, boy, I'm getting tired. All right, so here's when all those things were passed. Moral tariff right away before the Civil War. Then right after the Civil War, you had the legal tender, then Homestead Act, Pacific Railway Act. Moral land grant college. Oh, that's one thing I didn't discuss is the land grant college thing was to increase the knowledge to more effectively utilize your resources to develop, be more productive. So agriculture science, animal husbandry, right? Maybe breeding, some science in breeding, so forth. But also conservation of resources, conservation of soil and water, and and then engineering knowledge to promote transportation, because all this stuff is not possible without transportation to market, right? So transportation in the form of bridges, railroads, roads, canals, and what have you, right? Land development has to go along with transportation development. Without transportation, land means nothing. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I want to go through some of the arguments people say. Well, the Civil Wars fought to free the slaves, and show how ridiculous and bogus they are, baseless they are, right? So here's argument number one, right? The slaves were freed as a result of the Civil War. Thus, the war was fought to free the slaves. No, there's no necessary relationship between the two, right? It is true that the slaves were freed as a result of the Civil War, but that in no way means the war was fought to free the slaves. This is a complete non sequitur, which is a conclusion that does not follow from its premises. It's like, I don't know what a good example is, but it's like ridiculous, right? There's no logical, connection. Just because the slaves were freed due to the Civil War does not mean in the least that that's why the Civil War was fought, right? For example, the North did not start the Civil War. I mean, if the Civil War was fought to free the slaves, then you'd have to say the North started it. Well, they didn't. They did everything. They bent over backwards, guaranteeing slavery, and trying to expand slavery to appease the South, right? Which is not trying to end slavery. Okay. Anyways, I'm getting tired here. So political leaders in the southern states that seceded all said in the chorus that it was because the North was about to free the slaves. All right. I hear a lot of people say this. People who think they're intelligent. Oh yeah. The ultimate proof is all the southern states said that the North was trying to free the slaves. Well, what does that matter, right? If the North wasn't trying to free the slaves, then it means nothing. It's ridiculous. Okay, many people take this as evidence or even proof that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves, and you got to wonder about their intelligence here. Now, do people lie? Well, yeah, right? Are people self-serving? Yeah. Do they try to promote their agenda through lying? Yeah. Do people have ulterior motives? Yeah. Was slavery written into the Constitution in 4 places, and therefore emancipation required an amendment to the Constitution and there wasn't even a bill in Congress, right? Let alone any chance that such an amendment would pass. There's like no chance it would pass, right? And I went through all that already, from ratification to getting the votes, with southern states there, there's no way it would have passed, right? It barely passed by 2 votes with only northern states, and that's with the war going on already, and that's with Lincoln buying votes, right? So there's no threat to the elimination of slavery. There was no effort to eliminate slavery. They guaranteed the right for slaves, right? People can't think through a simple thing like this. It's amazing. Northern politicians didn't want to push an emancipation amendment because that would cause a breakup of our nation and a civil war. No one in the North wanted a civil war, right? And in fact, after the Southern states seceded, claiming the North was going to free the slaves, the now Northern-controlled Congress, right, the Southern states having left Congress, passed the 13th Amendment, Corwin Amendment, which guaranteed the right for all slave states to keep their slaves, and they offered New Mexico as a slave state. So the North bent over backwards and said, "For God's sakes, keep your slaves, please." Right? Right? And the North was not trying to free the slaves. They're promoting slavery, both the preservation of slavery and expansion of slavery, in order to avoid war. Right? They're trying to offer up, something to take away any Southern excuse for seceding. Right? But that didn't work. And that's because the issue was far more profound. The issue was about political power, which is about control of legislation, which determined the economic fortunes or misfortunes or devastation to the Southern economy. In December of 1860, the House of Representatives proposed to immediately admit New Mexico as a slave territory. All right, I told you that. After the war started in 1861, the Northern-controlled Congress passed the Crittenden-Johnson resolution, which declared that we will not fight the war to free the slaves. The slaves would not be freed as a result of this war. All right. So when the 13th Amendment finally passed, the second one, on January 31st, it passed by only 2 votes. Right? And it passed when the war was not a factor anymore because the war was already being fought. It's eliminated as a factor preventing, discouraging such an amendment, right? Also, it barely passed with Lincoln twisting arms to get votes and buying votes. There's even rumor that Lincoln even bribed lame duck representatives. Okay, that's according to what's her face, Goodwin, right? She gives evidence of it. Let's see. Okay. All right, I'm getting so tired here. Given this, there was zero substance to the claim that the North was going to free the slaves. The North by itself barely wanted to free the slaves, passing it only by 2 votes, right? Even with the Civil War being fought, and even with Lincoln buying votes, barely passed. The North bent over backwards, passing the Corwin Amendment, guaranteeing the right to keep slaves, offering New Mexico as slave territory, right? All right, so that's just a repeat of all that stuff. Now, were Northerners against introducing of slavery into the North? Yeah. Into the new territories? Yeah. Why? Because it was self-serving, right? It would take away jobs. It would lower wages. It would take away land opportunities, right? It would destroy, the disposable incomes, right? Consumer power of an industrial manufacturing consumption society, right? It would impoverish the economic system, right? And also, you have here, I say here, well, if you introduce slavery, well, who's going to have all the money? The slave plantation owners. Then they're going to dominate political power, just like they did in the South. You think the Northerners wanted that, right? At the same time, you think the Northerners gave a rat's ass about the plight of the slaves in the South, right? That's not their issue, right? They were slaves for a long time, right? Maybe some cared, but a lot of the abolitionists didn't want a war. Right? Most of the abolitionists didn't want a war. Just a rare few took actions, like John Brown. What was he? He was an aberration, isolated case, small, trivial, inconsequential in the big picture, right? As far as real effect, right? Got a lot of press, but what does that matter? Did it stir people up to go, oh, let's go? No, it didn't, right? Not until the state started to secede did people, But why did they fight? To preserve their union. We'll go through some of the motivations of why people fought here. All right. I'm trying to push through this. I'm getting really tired. All right, so this is all evidence of how the South used racism in the past, right? and this is evidence that they're with their fear of their fear mongering, right? Fear mongering always gets people whipped up to support wars. That's a classic example, classic method to get the masses to support a war. Well, you whip up fear, right? This is just classic fear mongering. There was no basis that the North was threatening to free the slaves, right? Just whip up fear. Oh, they're going to unleash the black masses upon you. They're going to rape your women. They're going to take your jobs. They're going to, compete for goods. They're going to marry your children. They're going to have the vote. They're going to have political power. They're going to have legislation to benefit them and not you. All right. So another baseless argument that's used to say, oh, the Civil War was fought to free the slaves is the abolitionists were a powerful driving force which caused the Civil War in their quest for emancipation of the slaves. Well, no, they were not a powerful force, right? The abolitionist movement was not very big. In fact, it was small and concentrated largely in the northeastern religious groups, and they didn't want war to free the slaves, but they wanted the slaves free, but not through war. Also, there was only one abolitionist paper, and it had a very small distribution, right? They hoped to free the slaves through legislation, right? Now, they were small in number, and so they had little political clout. The Republican Party was a northern political power, and they wanted a gradual elimination of slavery through market or economic forces, because it was believed that slavery was inferior industrial economic system that stultified industrial development. They didn't want war. The big industrial and financial powers were against slavery, but they didn't want war as well. Generally, they were not concerned with emancipation as a moral cause, so much as they saw slavery or non-wage labor as stifling economic development in the South, preventing economic growth and industrialization, decreasing their chances of wealth generation and accumulation, right? And I read that northern textile manufacturers actually wanted slavery in the South. Not in the North, but in the South, because that provided cheap cotton, right? I also read that the white people in the North who were at the bottom of the rung were the Irish immigrants, and they wanted to maintain slavery in the South, because at least parts of them, big parts of them, because they feared that if the blacks were emancipated, then they would come up north and then compete with jobs. What jobs? The low end jobs that the Irish immigrants were being abused themselves. So they're stuck with the low end jobs, right? And they would compete with those jobs, right? So they didn't want the slaves free for that reason. They didn't want more competition. Abolitionists would only have power through their representatives, and the northern politicians didn't want war as well. Right, the radical abolitionists were a rare breed, like the John Brown, right? And there wasn't a very big movement themselves. John Brown had 36 followers, 18 in the Harper's Ferry thing, right? He managed to kill 5 people, rampaged around for 36 hours, and then he's arrested, then hung, right? So much for that. The Emancipation Proclamation proves that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves. Oh, no, it doesn't. Right? I'm getting tired. I'm not going to go. I'll just go into this. All right. So, what is that? I don't want to page layout. All right. So, the Emancipation Proclamation declared that all slaves in the slaves waging war against the Union were to be freed, and this was passed in 1863, right? So what that means is not all slaves. It didn't say all slaves are free, right? The slaves in the border states who remained in the Union, right? Largely in the Unionist Party, right? Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. Well, all those slaves would have to stay slaves. They would be free. Right? Only slaves in the slave states would be freed according to the proclamation. Right? Now, the proclamation was just that, a statement. It was not law, right? It wasn't passed by Congress. It was just something the president said, and it had limited power, and that power was only during the war, right? It was simply Lincoln saying, hey, I'm freeing those slaves because I said so, right? And I can say so because we're at war, and rules don't apply to you anymore. You're rebelling, right? Laws, forget laws for you. We're going to free your slaves, right? Now, the slavery, like I said, is written into the Constitution in 4 places, all right, including the Fugitive Slave Act, right? So unless there's an amendment to the Constitution, once the war is over, they got to go back and follow the law. And what's the law in the books? The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and the Constitution of the United States, both of which have fugitive slave clauses. So all those slaves who Lincoln freed because he said so, he waved his magic wand and said, "You're free." Well, they got to go back being slaves because that's the law, right? Without the, so proclamation had limited power, right? Without the 13th Amendment, all runaway slaves would have to be returned to the South as slaves, right? And the 13th Amendment passed by only 2 votes, like I said, with Lincoln, twisting arms and buying votes, and with the Civil War going on already, barely passed, right? Now, the second 13th Amendment, that was the second 13th Amendment. The first was the Corwin Amendment, which guaranteed slavery, right? Bottom line is, what the Emancipation Proclamation was not a move to free the slaves. It was a strategic move to undermine the Southern economy. If you can get those slaves to escape the South, right? And the Southern economy is based upon slave labor, right? Well, you just undermine their economy. If you undermine their economy, you undermine their revenues. You undermine their capacity to finance their war, right? You weaken them fundamentally. All right. Also, if you encourage young black males to come to the North, well, you just got a whole bunch of new soldiers. You get all these black soldiers, right? So that's strategic as well. It's manpower and it's resources here. All right. So remember, Lincoln said, "My paramount objective in the struggle is to save the Union, and it is neither to save or destroy slavery." All right, so people that John Brown proves that the Civil War was fought to free the slave. John Brown, he's one person, right? First, John Brown was a single person with only a small handful of followers. I think it was like 3 dozen, like 36. At Harper's Ferry, he had only 18 following him there, right? And then in Harper's Ferry, he only killed 5 people. It's not like a major movement, right? And then he only operated for 36 hours. And then he was arrested. And then he was hung, right? All right. Okay. Oh, goodness sakes. What do I have here? I got more stuff here. All right, we'll go into this one. All right, so while the North was not trying to free the slaves, the North was trying to prevent expansion of slavery into the North, which was just as bad. Right. First, this is not a threat to slavery in the South. Right. Preventing slavery from expanding into the North is not a threat to freeing the slaves in the South. It is not. Right. So it is an irrelevant to the argument that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves. Right? Just because people didn't want slavery in the new territories where they hope to have opportunity doesn't mean they're willing to go and fight and die to free slaves in the South, which has no advantage to them. All right, it's 2 different things totally. Second, the South had already won the legal right for slavery into the North with the 1850 Compromise, 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the Dred Scott case of 57, right? These 3 meant that slavery is admissible everywhere in the United States under the principle of popular sovereignty. which means there had to be statewide referendum, right, to accept slavery. Right? You had to have popular support in that state for slavery to be in that state or territory, right? And people didn't want slavery because it would steal jobs, it would destroy opportunity, it would drive down wages, it would give the southern plantation owners the capacity to gobble up all the land, right? Stealing opportunity from the average northerner who had little to nothing, right? And they put their hopes into free land, 160 acres free. Slavery destroyed economic development in the South, causing widespread poverty, right? It destroyed industrial development in the South. Slavery gave disproportionate political power to a small group of super rich slave plantation owners. So with the Dred Scott decision, from my memory, I ruled that it was legal for a slave owner to bring his property into a free state, but this would run into the big fight over states' rights, state legislation, municipal legislation, militant hotheads who see their opportunities being threatened. They're going to fight tooth and nail to stop slavery from coming in, right? And you know, the small few slave owners will not be able to fight the masses in the North. Evidence of prejudice. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that, well, you know, the Northerners had no love for the blacks as it was, right? You think they're going to go fight in the South when it's not in their interest, right, to free slaves when here, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Oregon all passed laws barring blacks from entering. You think they're going to go fight free to slaves when they're passing laws to keep blacks out of their states? Right? Blacks can't come into our states. Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa all denied free blacks their right to vote. Right? Well, that's a little bit prejudiced. That's a little bit biased. That's a little bit self-serving. These and other states passed restrictive laws similar to Southern slave codes. So they passed laws similar to Jim Crow laws. Right? In the North. You think they're pro-black? Even Lincoln was prejudiced. He believed blacks were an inferior race. That is true. He believed that blacks should not have political power. That is true. He believed blacks should be sent back to Africa, to places like Liberia and Sierra Leone. All right. So the argument that the North was trying to prevent expansion of slavery into the North has nothing to do with freeing the slaves in the South, right? The South already had won every legal right to introduce slaves in the North, but under the principle of popular sovereignty, which was a stone wall. The 0.1% super rich slave plantation owners could not force slavery down the throats of the northern masses. They could fight a war. They could fight a war to force slavery, force masses in the North to accept slavery. I say here. Okay. What else am I saying here? Okay. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to go to... all right, so I'm going to read... Here's an argument. Well, people say this. I would have fought and died for the slaves. You know what? It's easy to say. When it comes down to really putting your life on the line, you think people are going to do it, right? A lot of people say, "Yeah, I would have fought," right? A lot of people like to think more highly of themselves than. Anyways, you say people are sacrificing and good-hearted by nature and willing to sacrifice their lives to free people they don't know, or free people they may even be prejudiced against, or free people who may be a threat to their jobs. Yeah, right. But this is true of a very few. So I believe some people that are sacrificing, but very, very few. Most people are wholly self-serving, wholly self-protecting, right? But I believe the fundamental nature of people is to be self-serving. Here are some far more likely reasons why young men fought in the Union Army, not to free the slaves. One, to preserve the Union and to save their country. Why? Because it's their country, right? to prevent the damn rebels from destroying their country. Right? They hated the rebels. They hated Johnny Reb. Young males are young, dumb, and full of, young males are reckless and don't think they'll die. Is always the other guy. They were a lot of them were too afraid not to go. Army units were formed from communities. For an able-bodied young male not to go when all the others were going would be social suicide, would be, opportunity suicide. You'd have no place in that community, right? If all the other young boys went and risked their lives and you didn't go, right, you'd be shunned in that community. You'd have no future in that community. Young males are easily pumped up with machismo, false bravado, right, to keep from being thought of as a coward, right? A lot of times they fight because they're too afraid not to. They fear the yellow stain on their back, the yellow streak on their back. They fought maybe because their brothers and friends were going and wanted to support them, to win glory for themselves. Too often, some people are pumped up with ego and pride, right? Because they're too young and stupid to know the suffering and horrors of war. Alright, but the above list shows that there are many reasons other than fighting and dying for someone who you may not know, who you may not even care for, who you may be even prejudiced against, who may be a threat to your jobs, right? May not even want to be free because they may come to the north and take your jobs and compete for housing, right? All right, I think that's enough. I'm just tired. There's more, but I'm getting tired here. All right, I'll stop it there.